Nowadays, pretty much every company has some sort of corporate wellness program in place. Are these programs actually mindful? I'm not really sure, but I know someone who is. Joining me today is Ashley Wray, mindfulness meditation expert and executive coach. And she's going to help us unpack what it really means for companies to be mindful. I'm Laura Jones, and this is Opinion Party, the podcast where we dispel the most pervasive myths in modern marketing. Welcome to the party, Ashley.
Thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here.
So, Ashley, we met 1 year ago at the Institute for Real Growth, and your presence and your energy immediately drew me in. If I remember, you were leading a meditation in the morning, hundreds of chief marketing officers, really powerful people with big jobs, big responsibilities. You could not even hear a pin drop. And to this day, I hear all of them. Well, I hear them, I read them in the WhatsApp chat that continues, and they still quote you because you're so quotable and so memorable. So I just want to say meeting you has had a profound impact because for once I felt like there is someone in this room that gets what it's like to have big feelings and just understand that emotions and vibrations are a really important part of us. And we can bring that into our work. So I just want to say thank you for that.
Well, thank you. That's really kind. Thank you very much. That makes me very happy.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit, because this is not always what your career was, correct?
That's right. So I'm very grateful to work in mindfulness and well-being now. And I had a very different life. In the past, I was a journalist covering murder trials. So it's often the joke from murder to meditation, and that I deeply prefer talking about mindfulness, self-compassion, self-awareness, empathy, and doing it in a way that is accessible and isn't intimidating. Because most people, when I tell them what I do, they immediately go to, I know I need to, I know I should. And need and should are so full of self-judgment. So how can I maybe take those journalism skills of synthesizing information and making it accessible, do that in the world of meditation? So I really love being in this world, and I love being in this community of leaders and helping leaders bring this into their daily life, whether that's professional or personal or both.
What are some of the assumptions that people make about mindfulness, just presence, self-awareness, talking about judgment? What are some of the assumptions people make that you just wish you can tell them you have no idea?
I like to start with always saying I'm teaching this because I'm also seeking it. I'm not perfect. I've not perfected this. It is a continual practice. I don't think you all of a sudden become perfectly aware and perfectly mindful. It is consistently evolving. You're consistently learning to re-embody things that you're learning. So outside of that, I think one of the biggest myths or things that I see people believing or hear people believing is in meditation, I have to sit with no thoughts. I keep having thoughts, so I must be doing it really bad. And actually, that's not true. The point of meditation is not to have no thoughts. So when I was teaching last year, and you probably heard me talk about this, that if we reframe meditation and look at it as an opportunity to sit and maybe witness our thoughts and not get hooked into them or pulled into them and not get carried away with whatever story we're telling, how can we not end up way out here when actually we're here in this present moment? So how do we learn to return to ourselves again and again, which sounds so simple and it sounds so easy, but it takes constant practice. It takes constant remembering. And I was talking about this yesterday when I was speaking on stage again here, that meditation and mindfulness is this act of remembering. We're not cultivating anything new. We're coming back to this ability that we have to be aware that so many of us have lost. So meditation is not this practice of sitting with no thoughts and clearing your mind. It is being okay with all those thoughts, learning to come back to yourself again and again. And it is difficult. Most of our thoughts are negative. So of course we don't want to sit with that. It's way easier to pick up our phone or turn on the TV, open our laptop, whatever we want to do to distract. But sitting without distraction is in itself difficult.
So difficult. So difficult, especially in the business world. So many of the clients that you work with have high pressure, high stakes positions, athletes, executives. You've been to some of the biggest conferences in the world with some of the most impressive people. Yet I'm sure that a lot of them all share common challenges with shutting it off. What are the things that you see the most, and what are some of your techniques? I know you've got a lot of great ones to really help people start along this journey.
Yeah. So I love that you mentioned that, because when I first started, I was quite intimidated by these people, by these athletes, by these big brands and logos that I've known my whole life, coming into these companies and realizing everyone is just human. We're all human. We're all trying to figure it out. And when I'm speaking at events, maybe I'll ask a question. Does anybody have any questions, or are there any thoughts? And nobody wants to answer. Nobody wants to ask. And then they'll all line up one by one by one and ask the same question. So actually, it's quite a unifying experience. It's quite a human experience to all feel a little bit unsure, a little bit insecure, a little bit uncertain. Am I doing it right? Is this the best way? What I notice in the corporate world, not so much the sport world, is what's the ROI of this thing I'm doing? And when's that ROI going to kick in? And even after I talk about that, there's no immediacy. There's no, 3 20-minute sessions and it'll click. People will still ask, but what's the secret that you're not telling me? When will it start to work? So I liken it to going to the gym. You don't go to the gym 3 times and have abs. It's consistency. And that's unfortunately not a sexy answer. That consistency and showing up for ourselves again and again, it starts to wear off, if we're not committed to it for a deeper purpose, for an intrinsic reason. And I think what I've seen with people is when they're intrinsically motivated, maybe something's happened in their life, or they're very stressed, or they've had a big life change. When we're intrinsically motivated to sit and really commit to a practice, it's a different pull than I want that ROI of that thing that I read about. And it's not wrong. Neither approach is wrong. There's different reasons people come to meditation. So that's one unifying thing I see, is this comparison, because it's so internal. So you and I can be sitting here meditating together, and I could open my eyes and you're sitting there and uh-oh, she's doing such a good job. I'm totally doing this wrong. I screwed up. And maybe 2 seconds later, I close my eyes and you open your eyes and you're thinking the same about me. We don't know each other's internal experience. And I think that's why people get quite nervous to ask questions. I'm the only person in this group that maybe their leg fell asleep or their foot hurts, or I'm thinking about lunch, or I'm planning an email, but actually it's happening to everyone. And so what I really like to do is normalize that human experience, realize that's not wrong. It's okay. And that's part of the experience. And then once we've done that, maybe we feel a bit more safe to drop in. And maybe once they've heard some of the businesses I work with or athletes, oh yeah, I guess if they do it, maybe I could try it. I guess if that person that I really respect is doing it, I'll give that a go. And so you've heard me talk about, 3 different areas of reframing meditation, that if we think about meditation, perhaps it's an opportunity to practice self-compassion by coming back to ourselves again and again and again. So when we get hooked with the thought, the moment we become aware is the moment we become aware that we were unaware is the moment we become aware again. So realizing, I'm supposed to be sitting here and my mind's out here. Well, you've just become aware again. So that in itself is the practice. So when we realize that moment, we can choose to judge ourselves. I'm so bad at this. I knew I shouldn't have sat and did this meditation. This is so stupid. I'm awful. Or I'm going to come back to myself, and I'm going to come back and I'm going to practice kindness. So I often give this analogy of a bicycle wheel. I think you probably heard me talk about this before. So in the center of our bicycle wheel, we have our focal point, and maybe that's my voice, or maybe that's your breath. Okay. We're breathing, we're listening. And then our mind goes out here, that spoke on the bicycle wheel. My mind has wandered. I'm supposed to be over here. And when we get to the tire, that's that moment of awareness. Okay, I can stay out here or I can come back. And the reason that's important is because maybe in 10 minutes, we're going to have 200 spokes on that bicycle wheel. We're going to have 200 thoughts, maybe 300 thoughts. So if we simply think of meditation as an opportunity to practice self-love and self-compassion 300 times in 10 minutes, that's a lot easier than sitting and thinking, I have to have no thoughts for 10 minutes. We're just going to practice self-compassion. Then the next thing we move on to is maybe there's 200 spokes on that wheel, and maybe next time it's 100 spokes on the wheel. Maybe it's 70 spokes on the wheel, and you're creating a little bit of space. And in that space, we get aha moments. And it's proven now that when we're in a relaxed state of mind, we can tap into innovation and creativity, which is incredibly important for marketeers. So all those CMOs like, oh, another way to access innovation and creativity? Of course I want to try this. So we have compassion, we have innovation and creativity. And then we have this ability, the more that we come back to ourselves, the more space we're creating within ourselves, the more we're witnessing our thoughts and not getting hooked by them, we can start to learn what we want to trust, what we want to follow. We're starting to learn our intuition, if you like the word intuition, or God, or the cosmos, or the universe, whatever we credit that voice, the aha moment to, we learn to trust ourselves more. And I noticed that out of those three, the compassion, the innovation and creativity, and the trust, those are quite fundamental within teams. And as leaders and as humans, those are great skills. But in my experience, my self-compassion, my internal voice quickly becomes my external voice. So the kinder I am to myself, the kinder I am to others. As a leader, that's pretty important. Being able to tap into innovation and creativity and ideate, that's a really big gift for anyone, whether you think you're in a creative place or not in your work. We're all creative inherently in some way. And learning to trust ourselves and trust others, that psychological safety, we have to foster that first within ourselves. And that word trust is something that keeps coming up in business. So I find those three areas, we could do an hour conversation of each of them individually. That was a very long answer.
I love
but
that.
That's kind of the exploration of the simplification to remove those blocks from people and thinking they can't do this thing.
Can we do that? Can we have an hour-long conversation on each of these? Yes. I mean, you need to come back for sure
I would love that.
onto Opinion Party because yes, all of that. That gym analogy is so powerful for so many reasons. That comparison, as you were telling that story, I am in any type of workout class that was the fad at the moment, and you're always wondering, am I doing this right? You're looking to your left, to your right. Should I stand in the back? Because what if I mess up? What if people don't want to see me? And instantly in those moments, those are all the thoughts you're actually talking about from a meditation perspective. That is really, really helpful. So you work with a lot of companies, and I think it's very easy for us as marketers to jump to the execution, to say, oh, okay, we've got this insight about people. Let's do a campaign about it. Do you have an example or a situation where maybe a brand has approached you, and you don't have to name names, and you help them to reframe or take a different approach?
Yeah. I find it very curious, and I know we'll get here, but I started my first company in meditation in 2011, and it was this weird hippie woo-woo thing that didn't exist. And now the word mindfulness is used so often. And I'm seeing the word compassion used more, which I adore that word's used more. But mindfulness, like, what does that even mean? I just want to slap it into my marketing. I want to throw it on a brand, well-being, wellness, all these different words are integrating into our everyday life in a normal way that maybe wasn't normal 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So I think I would liken it to like greenwashing, maybe we'll call it like wellness washing, that perhaps there's a lack of understanding of what these words mean. And so maybe I'll explain mindfulness is a meditation. You can sit and do a mindful meditation, but it's also a way of being. So we sit in a formal meditation practice, a mindfulness practice as a meditation, or we live mindfully with present moment awareness through the day. Again, easier said than done. So I've worked with brands before where they've wanted to integrate mindfulness into their product and market it that way. Mindful this, mindful that, cue whatever verbiage after. And I've worked with them on understanding, how do we integrate this in a way that is authentic to you and your product? So that requires an investigation and reflection of what are the brand values already inherent within the brand? Because if we go too outside, if we're using words like meditation and mindfulness and your audience, those words don't resonate, that's too big of a leap. That's too big of a stretch. It's not going to land in the way that maybe it will. But oftentimes if it's too abstract, it's hard to wrap your head around, and it doesn't give the same return or the same effect they're hoping for. So going into companies, that often requires, what are the brand values? What are the words you would associate with this product? Is one of the values joy? Is it playfulness? Is it slowing down? Is it whatever. There's so many words that you can use. So how do we attach mindfulness to a word like joy? What would a synonym be of mindfulness or well-being that's authentic to a word like joy? What about slowing down? Well, that's pretty mindful. And how do you associate that to a product that already exists? So it's using the brand language instead of just, dragging and dropping the word mindfulness in, dragging and dropping the word wellness in. What is authentic to that company in this moment that's not going to throw their consumers off or make the consumers wonder, why is this happening? Why is this product marketing itself this way? Or maybe it doesn't align anymore because that word's too outside of my vernacular, or I don't resonate with that and this brand anymore. So it's meant to be a more seamless approach, but understanding that can take so many forms. The word mindfulness and wellness or well-being or meditation, those are quite specific words. Those aren't going to always apply in the exact way that I think we hope they would, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. It's almost like we're using them as a shortcut in a way for deeper understanding, not only of brands, but maybe even sometimes of ourselves, which is why this myth really came about, right? Which is the entire wellness industry is kind of jumping right to that solution of mindfulness and not necessarily actually taking it back a step and saying, one of the things that I really strive to live my life by is to construct a life where I don't need to feel like I need to escape it. And that was a big shift for me because I am a little bit of a spa junkie. I love a good spa. I love a good wellness retreat. But there was a shift once I started doing some deeper work where I realized I don't need to get away from this to feel that feeling. I could have that feeling sitting on my favorite spot on the couch. I can have it in my car on the way to on my commute. I could have it right now sitting here with you, which I sort of am. But that was a huge unlock for me. And you mentioned you started your company in 2011. I want to roll back a little bit and touch on that. So besides all the murder, which I could totally see why you wanted to, get into something else, what was that moment for you, that pivot and that shift that made you start that company?
Yeah. So in the moment when I was covering murder trials, I was obsessed with it. I think that I was either the best or worst dinner guest. And this was long before all the murder podcasts and things that became very popular. And I was obsessed with it, not because of murder, but because of what humans are capable of in the best and worst extremes of what our human experience is. And so, yes, I much prefer what humans are capable of when it comes to compassion and empathy and loving ourselves and communication. But the business truly started by accident. It started from meeting a woman on an airplane and talking about meditation and how to bring it to the West. And so we started by making products in meditation, which you don't need anything to meditate, which I was very well aware of. So there was that internal battle, but it truly was meant to be, if this is something that inspires your practice, if this tactical product inspires you to sit, or if this inspires self-love, if this inspires tranquility, beautiful, we have it, but you don't need to have it. Maybe not the strongest marketing campaign, but it was honest and it was real. And so that truly sparked a deep exploration for me of what mindfulness meant and what meditation was, because in 2011, it wasn't talked about in the way that it's talked about now. And I felt like it was quite inaccessible. So when I'm teaching and trying to make it accessible and understandable, it's because I remember being nervous to ask those same questions. I remember thinking, I can't sit there with no thoughts and not move for an hour. Is that what meditation is supposed to be? And so it became a more playful exploration. I spent a lot of time in India, in Nepal, in Bali, in China, and, around Asia. And from there started learning about meditation and the different forms of meditation. So most people think I started the business because I was very passionate about meditation, but I started it because of a serendipitous moment and then got into meditation, for which I am incredibly grateful. I deeply believe in serendipity. I deeply believe that people can change our life every day. And when I started, why would you do this thing? You're an award-winning journalist. Why would you start this business from meeting this hippie? And then 10 years later, how did you know meditation was going to be so big? How did you spot the trends? I had no idea. And I think people around us that love us, that want us to win, that want us to succeed, they'll always warn us, like, don't do that thing, don't do this, because they care. And I always thought, what's the worst that will happen? This will be a unique experience, and I'm incredibly grateful for that. But another piece of feedback I often got was, I wish something like that would fall into my lap. And what you don't see is the years of self-doubt, of fear of the unknown, of running a business. I didn't have any entrepreneur friends. I had no idea what I was doing. It was very humbling. So I do find that whole experience almost like a past life now, but I think it helps me to relate to C-suite and executives because I ran and scaled a company and I deeply understand and love meditation. By no means did I run a company at the size of the CMOs or C-suite that I work with now, but I think the human experience and the human problems are different, maybe just with more zeros and more pressure behind them, but it's the same feelings and thoughts and limiting beliefs that we all share on some level. So going from running that business into teaching was very organic as well. And I actually didn't want to teach or be on stages because my practice was for me. I didn't want to be that person on Instagram, pitching meditation, telling everyone that they need to do this. That experience was just for me. And I had a friend say to me, you're taking trainings around the world. That's kind of selfish of you not to share just a little bit of that learning. And maybe he was, taking a bit of a jab. And I thought maybe there is something there to share it. And if people like it, then that's great. They can be on the receiving end. But I never thought this would be the full transition to what I'm doing in this way now. And it truly happened again through serendipity, working at TED Talks, working with speakers before they went on stage, helping them get focused. And I talk about that a lot now that that analogy earlier of coming back to yourself again and again helps cultivate focus and clarity. And great leaders have focus and clarity. And that started to roll into working with CMOs. I think CMOs, as I mentioned earlier, really value innovation and creativity. And not saying that they're the most open-minded, but in my experience, CMOs are so open. They're so curious. And I love that value, having been a journalist and being really curious and now curious about meditation. So this whole path, I'm still quite in awe of. And I think that another big turning point being COVID made it far more accessible. So what I do now, I'm not totally sure if it would have been something people would have received pre-COVID. But now people really recognize, hey, we do have anxious thoughts, or we do have loneliness, or how we practice self-compassion does have an impact. How we lead has an impact. Empathy has an impact. I'm not sure if those words would have resonated talking to, a Fortune 100 company 5, 6, 7 years ago. Maybe. But now I think people are seeking it out openly and outwardly. They're proactively looking for it. And I'm grateful that I can be one of those people that gets to help facilitate that for people.
Absolutely. There's so many interesting and exciting things that just start from a spark of a conversation with someone on an airplane. And I just love that that's how your journey started out. And COVID being one of the big flashpoints, obviously from a people perspective, can definitely see isolation, loneliness, stressing out about job loss, family, sickness, all the things. I'm curious, you said also it was a point that corporations started wanting these programs for their employees as part of trainings. Why do you think companies started to care?
Yeah. I think the most direct answer is there's a really high cost to burnout. Companies were losing a lot of money. Losing great leadership also loses momentum in business. And people started realizing not just the cost, but I need to protect my team. The people are the most important part of our business. And so now a lot of the work I do, I work primarily with C-suite and with leadership to empower them to be more empathetic and compassionate leaders, to not just, increase productivity and output, because yeah, of course, that's a big part of it. But how do you get your team flowing in a way where there's trust, where there's strong communication, where there's healthy boundaries, and getting that team in this groove and in this flow? And we know what that feels like to be working in a team that's in flow. Oh my goodness, it's such a great feeling versus a team that's in resistance, not flowing together, not working together. It's start, stop, start, stop. People are leaving. People have burnout. Very different environments. So now when I'm going in often I'll do a lot of executive coaching. We'll do a lot of reflective exercises. And often it's the only time per month that these leaders can zoom out and reflect on, how am I leading? Who do I want to be? What kind of leader am I? What kind of leader do I want to be? What are my values? Is that shown up in how I lead my team? And it's so beautiful to see people have this opportunity for self-reflection that maybe they wouldn't have realized prior how much, I guess I could just say, ROI is tied to self-reflection and self-awareness. And one of the things I talk about, that I spoke about last year and again this year, are the 3 Ps of mindfulness. So it's not permanent, it's not perfect, it's not personal. And these 3 areas, how we're reflecting on how we lead or how we show up in general, whether we are in leadership or not. So things are not perfect. And oftentimes we're striving for perfection. And then we can never feel like we can achieve it. We start to judge ourselves. What would it look like if we could just let something go and be okay with it? And where is this striving for perfection bringing us unhappiness or slowing us down or stopping us from moving forward or letting go of something? And it's not permanent, that impermanence is real. It's the one thing we have in common with every single person, that this is impermanent. So the bad stuff is impermanent. This too shall pass, but the good stuff is impermanent. So how can you enjoy the really great moments, being in the present moment and realizing, wow, this is going to pass. I should be really present, or maybe I could bring more joy and awareness into this moment. And it's not personal. This is the one I usually emphasize the most, is what does our daily life look like when we take things really personally? Because I get it. My life is about me. I'm the center of my universe. And we all kind of think like that, whether we want to admit it or not. But what does that mean for someone if they're not copied in on an email? They take that personally. What does that mean when they're not invited to a meeting? What does that mean when that budget's cut? What does that mean when that project gets dropped? Is that something I've done? What did I do wrong? What's happening here? And that starts to breed a culture of distrust. So how can we relearn that it's not always about ourselves, it's not always about us, but as leaders, what is our personal responsibility of how we show up in the room, of how we enter a room? Because oftentimes people take our energy, our communication personally and make it about themselves. So it's a really beautiful exercise in self-reflection for leaders. Who do I want to be? How do I show up? What am I in control of? We're not really in control of a lot. We're in control of how we show up, how we manage our energy, how we respond, not react. So there's so many beautiful tools that are applicable to both business and everyday life. It's not like we stop being one person at 5 o'clock or whatever time we finish work and we turn into a different person. Those values and the way we communicate, the way we think, are woven through every moment. So this reflection and this work is quite a holistic approach. And what I'm seeing is it takes time. So that gym analogy earlier, it takes time. And that question of when's it going to kick in, oftentimes people will reach out, hey, Ashley, I didn't fire back that email that I would have done 6 months ago, or I didn't react this way in a conversation, or I took a moment and paused before I said something, or I grounded myself and centered myself before a really difficult conversation. That's all these little micro moments. Something you spoke about earlier of, I want to go on retreats, go to the spa. How do we integrate that mindfulness and that awareness every day? Well, it can be these little moments. You know, and when I tell companies what I do, they're like, so are you going to teach us yoga for a weekend? I'm like, no. How do you integrate it really in these baby steps through the day where then that becomes the culture? Much like we were talking about with marketing, how we don't want the pendulum to swing from non-mindfulness to over-the-top mindfulness, right? In a branding perspective, we don't want our culture to be this black and white culture of not a lot of communication to we're going to sit and hold hands and meditate every day. We don't need to do this. We need to figure out what's our middle ground. So maybe that means in a cultural shift, everything I just mentioned, can we respond, not react? And having a conversation about that as a team. What do boundaries look like as a team? What communication style do we have? So it's these really beautiful micro moments, like microdosing mindfulness in this way where maybe, you know, one of the companies I work with has 5-minute intervals between meetings. You're only allowed to book a meeting until 5 too, because that gives people a 5-minute break to reflect and decompress before the next meeting. How often are people in Zoom call after Zoom call after Zoom call? I have to get it all in. I have to get it all in. And we take it so seriously and it's all so urgent. It can just be 2 minutes. It can be 3 minutes. It doesn't have to be 20 minutes. It doesn't have to be a full weekend retreat. We want to be able to integrate it in our daily life. And that's when we start to see the changes happen naturally over a period of time.
Microdosing mindfulness. I think that you're on to something. And I loved how you mentioned what I have come to call them affectionately as the 3 Ps, because I remember hearing that for the first time. It's not personal, it's not perfect, and it's not permanent. It's so simple, and it is so beautiful, and it's so hard to practice. But I think that 4th P is probably practice. And that's why they call meditation a practice. Yeah. Okay, so you've mentioned how you work with corporations. That makes a ton of sense. Getting teams into flow, helping businesses be more profitable. When people are happy, people make money. You mentioned you work with sports teams too. How does what you're doing in the corporate world translate to your work with sports teams and athletes?
Yeah, I find this bridge between corporate and sport so interesting and so beautiful. That in corporate, what would it look like if more leaders practice compassion and empathy? And how could that change companies and change people and change the world? And in sport, they are still businesses. They are still companies. So that same notion applies, but specific with athletes and peak performance, which I think companies are also very curious about, is how do I get to this place of peak performance? So often athletes talk about being in the state of flow, so hitting flow state, where time expands, maybe it slows down, and we can only get to that flow state by practicing present moment awareness. So when I'm teaching people meditation or mindfulness, coming back to ourselves again and again, when we're in that present moment, everything else is able to melt away. And as a leader, I talked about focus and clarity being so important, and being in that present moment allows us to find that focus and that clarity. So very similar in sport and in corporate. And what I find so curious is they're both interested in what the other is doing. The athletes and the sports teams want to know what the big successful companies are doing. The companies want to know what the athletes are doing. And it's all bridged together with that self-awareness, with mindfulness and practicing presence.
Okay, Ashley, I'm going back to something you said, which was your friend. Your friend poked you and said, it's selfish if you don't share this with the world. And I feel like it's selfish if I don't share your practice and your voice with the world from a meditation. So if you would be so kind, just before we wrap our party, maybe you can just take our audience through what it's like to do a 1-minute meditation with Ashley Wray.
Oh, I'd be honored.
And I'm going to meditate with you.
Okay, beautiful. We'll keep it really short. We'll just go from head to toe and do a little bit of breathing. So, okay, we will begin. So find a comfortable seat. If you're sitting in a chair and you're able to put your feet on the ground, you can do so. You put your hands resting in your lap in whatever way feels comfortable for you. Maybe rolling your shoulders back, rolling out your neck. And you can choose to close your eyes if you feel comfortable. Or you can hold a soft gaze just in front of you. And just taking a moment here, just noticing your breath. And there's no need to manipulate your breath, just noticing. And maybe then noticing you become aware that your breath is starting to slow. And maybe your thoughts begin to slow. And we'll soften in from head to toe, starting by relaxing the space between our eyebrows, unclenching our jaw, noticing that our spine is straight, but the body is softened and relaxed. Maybe taking a breath into your heart center, sending yourself a little bit of gratitude for taking a moment for yourself. And a breath into your lower belly, into your hips, your knees, your ankles, and your feet. And for these few final moments, allowing yourself to be truly supported in your seat, to really relax in to whatever position you're in. And maybe deepening the breath for a few final breaths here, coming back. When you feel ready, you can open your eyes, look around the room. See if anything looks different, feels different.
What a gift. Any final thoughts, Ashley, for our audience before we end the party?
Yeah, beautiful, thank you. I would say anyone that is interested in this or starting a practice, there's 3 things I usually suggest. So if you're going to start meditating, 1, I would say tie it to a habit that you've already built. It makes it a lot easier than building a new habit. So for me, making a French press in the morning, that signifies sitting down and doing meditation. So that's really easy. We don't have to build a new habit. The next is starting really small. And we mentioned this earlier, those micro moments. It can be a 2-minute meditation, 5 minutes, 8 minutes, and building your way up. And the third is when you miss a day, because you will, because we're human, to practice self-compassion and be kind to yourself. I think that is a beautiful overarching theme of practicing self-compassion through all of this.
Ashley, you are a true gift. This has been probably one of my most favorite parties ever. And I really want to thank you for joining. And I'm going to leave everyone with my final thought, which is, what if all the voices in our heads are just opinions? Feelings aren't facts. And it's really good to remind ourselves of that and bring us back to center, that bicycle wheel. I'm going to take that with me. So thank you.
Thank you.
That's all the time we have for Opinion Party. If you want more information about Ashley or any tips on meditation, we'll leave it in the show notes. As always, everyone's invited to the Opinion Party. So like, share, subscribe, and comment. Oh, and I'd probably bookmark this one too, because that meditation was so good. I'm going to keep coming back to that one. See you soon.